A rankings update where we have to just plummet Jonathan Taylor is never going to be fun, but at least we get to move our guy Josh Jacobs up. But at the very top end with a CMC, Bijan Robinson, Austin Eckler, all these guys remain the same, right? I mean, Christian McCaffrey has a higher ceiling in fantasy football than any player ever. I mean, this is a running back that had 150 total yards per game in 2019. We shouldn't really expect that this next year because obviously with Shanahan, you do expect a little bit of a split with and without Elijah Mitchell. However, with CMC, it's going to be a much better overall offense where you probably have more touchdown upside than he had back in Carolina. Now with Bijan Robinson as our next guy, please don't think he's going to bust just because he's a rookie and Clyde Edwards-Helaire did. We've seen round one fantasy football picks at the running back position come out and be massive successes. The last guy before Clyde Edwards-Helaire was Saquon Barkley, and that's actually who Bijan Robinson comps to as a prospect. Bijan Robinson was way better than Clyde Edwards-Helaire could have ever dreamed to be. It was just that CEH ended up getting pushed up due to the situation in KC. And I understand Eckler was the #1 overall flex player last year, but I do expect some natural regression. I mean, if you're going to go through and look at running backs going into their age 28 season, based off the season Eckler just had, he comps to running backs that pretty much only decline going into their next year. I mean, you have some elite level running backs on this list, right? I mean, you have David Johnson back in the day, but I mean, going top to bottom, Curtis Martin 2000 and 2001 declined from 19 points per game down to 18.5. You had David Johnson going from about 15.5 points per game down to 12. You had Deuce Staley going down to 10. You had Lamont Jordan going down to 8. You had Liddell Betts going down to 5. Eckler's not going to score 8-9 points per game this next season, but it is a spot where you probably just have to be a little bit concerned about the historical trend of running backs this old declining, as well as the fact that you bring in Quentin Johnston, so naturally you're going to have more target competition overall, and the targets were going to come down for Eckler anyway. I mean, last year he was pushed up so much based off the injuries to both Mike Williams and Keenan Allen, but if you look at the splits in games where he actually played with those wide receivers, I mean, he averaged 6.5 targets per game in games that Mike Williams played. He averaged 6.2 targets per game with Keenan Allen, whereas he was at 9.3 without Keenan, and he was at 10.5 without Big Mike. So yeah, I mean, the targets were going to come down no matter what. Quentin Johnson just pretty much guarantees that. Now, dropping down to our next tier, we will still have Saquon Barkley ahead of Josh Jacobs. I just think that the overall Giants offense is going to be better than what you have with the Raiders. I mean, with that being said, though, if you go over and look at what you have right now with these underdog season-long pick'ems, they have Saquon Barkley more than less than 7.5 rushing touchdowns. They have Saquon Barkley at only 1,100 rushing yards. Whereas if you're going to look at Josh Jacobs on the other end, they have Josh Jacobs at 8.5 rushing touchdowns and about 1,100 rushing yards as well. I do think Barkley's going to have a slightly larger role as a pass catcher. And with Jacobs, I understand people are going to be concerned of him coming off a massive workload. Don't be. I mean, just ignore the people looking at tiny sample sizes. We've gone back since the year 2000 and looked at all running backs coming off a season with 300 plus carries, 50 plus targets, and at the same time were 26 years old or younger. And Jacobs has a 70% chance to repeat as a running back one and a 90% chance to be a top 24 guy. Not really worried about Jacobs this season. And Chubb as our next player, you're going to be a lot more excited about in a non-PPR format. You have the elite offensive line. You probably have a very strong offense with Deshaun Watson overall. I mean, hell, if you're going to look at the season-long player props on Underdog right now, Nick Chubb currently is at 9 rushing touchdowns, and he's at slightly over 1,200 rushing yards. So those pick'ems actually have Chubb as the best option out of this list. It's just in a full PPR format. I expect these other running backs to have a larger role as a pass catcher. Now, dropping down to our next guy, we are going to be looking at Tony Pollard. Pollard was a top 10 option last year with Ezekiel Elliott in this offense. Now you have no Ezekiel Elliott. I mean, we know he's involved as a pass catcher. We know this is going to be a very good offense overall, and you assume that the red zone role is now fully Tony Pollard's. Derrick Henry as our next player, I understand, is elite, and he is the outlier of all outliers. He's been a top 5 running back every single season over the past 3 years, but he projects to have the worst offensive line in the NFL this next season. He's also going into his age 30 season, and if we look at all running backs that had a similar age 29 year to Derrick Henry since the year 2000, and we look through the road of his screener, you'll see that Arian Foster got injured the following season after crushing the year prior. LaShawn McCoy went out there and declined from 20 points per game to 16.5. Curtis Martin went from 19 points per game down to 15. Marshawn Lynch went from 19 points per game down to 12. DeMarco Murray went from 18.5 down to 12 as well. So Derrick Henry is going to go from 20 to, I don't know what, but probably going to decline just slightly based off all the historical data that we have. And those were also elite level running backs back in the day. I mean, Arian Foster, LaShawn McCoy, Marshawn Lynch, that was also the cream of the crop. Just running backs can't stay elite in their age 30 season, or very rarely does it happen. Now, our next guy, one of my most drafted running backs on Underdog this year. We've been getting him nonstop in round 4, Travis Etienne. With Etienne, he is a running back that I think expands his role as a pass catcher this next season. Not only does he expand his role as a pass catcher, but at the same time, you're on a rookie contract in one of the best offenses in the NFL with Trevor Lawrence taking that next step forward. We'll talk about Tank Bigsby at the end of this video. He should have a role, but I still expect Etienne to be seeing the high value touches in this backfield. Now, Ramondre Stevenson is our next player. What's very interesting is if you go look at the pick'em line for Ezekiel Elliott this next season, they have him only at 4.5 rushing touchdowns and 400 rushing yards. So Underdog's kind of telling us that Zeke's not going to be a massive force in this offense. Really, the main thing that I'd be worried about on the front of Ezekiel Elliott, of course, is that he's going to take the red zone job from Ramondre Stevenson. But with Ramondre, you're still excited in a full PPR format. Definitely bump him down in a non-PPR league, though. Now, Joe Mixon, our next guy. I mean, with Mixon, RB6 last year with a 15% team target share. He's also younger than what you have with players like Austin Eckler, Derrick Henry. So if you go through and check out his comps going into this next season, it's not like he's guaranteed to see some massive fall off. Obviously, it's a great offense as well. Now, our next player is actually going ahead of Joe Mixon in Underdog drafts, and that's going to be Jamir Gibbs. Now, I'll throw in the towel. I'll move Jamir Gibbs ahead of Najee Harris. With Gibbs, this is a running back that should be a phenomenal receiving down back, right? He's going to be that PPR specialist. I still think that David Montgomery has a role there in the red zone. We saw last year this coaching staff decide to implement a running back by committee, and they did give David Montgomery a considerable amount of money to be there this next season. Plus, Gibbs is 199 pounds. So for that reason, I do think that Montgomery's still in the mix, but obviously Gibbs has an elite level ceiling behind a great offensive line with an elite athletic profile and a phenomenal receiving down skill set. Now, Najee Harris is our next running back. And with Najee Harris here, I've actually been drafting him in more and more Underdog drafts. In a $500 Underdog draft last week on the live stream, I took Najee Harris round 5. Round 5, Najee Harris, beautiful. I'm going to take him there any day of the week because he does have a bullish case for this next season and that he's no longer dealing with the Liz Frank. He has a better offensive line. He should have better quarterback play overall, and he's significantly cheaper than he was a year ago. Now, with that being said, he is on a pretty bad trajectory. I mean, this is why we've had Travis Etienne ahead of him for a while now. But, I mean, I don't necessarily think that we have to just say he is completely dead in the water because last year, I mean, you can make some excuses for Najee Harris. And round 5 in Underdog drafts, I'm all about it. And of course, ladies and gentlemen, if you want to go out there and get into a draft with us, we are drafting still every single night on the live stream on Underdog Fantasy. That's the same place where you're seeing all the season-long pick'ems this video. And if you want to take advantage of any of those pick'ems or hop into a draft with us tonight, tomorrow, the next night, you can find a link to Underdog Fantasy in the live chat description section or comment section. And if you sign up to Underdog with promo code FLOCK, they're going to match your first deposit dollar for dollar up to $100. Plus, you're going to get our 2023 fantasy football rankings, a free trial to flockfantasy.com where you can find our 2023 fantasy football draft guide. Plus, only with promo code FLOCK are you going to get an exclusive Josh Allen pick'em week 1 against the Jets, more than less than half a passing yard. So please make sure you're taking advantage of that. And their best ball drafts, so no time commitment at all during this season. So I drafted 700 teams and won $150,000 last year on Underdog. But going over to our next guy, we will be looking at Breece Hall. Breece Hall is a running back that I expect to have a slow start to the season. So honestly, if you expect to be out there wheeling and dealing in your fantasy football league, I don't know if I go ahead and take Breece Hall at this point because he will be a running back that most likely loses a little bit of value at the beginning of the year with an expanded role for Dalvin Cook. But I'm more so drafting Breece Hall at this range for the elite level ceiling weeks 15, 16, 17. Now, Kenneth Walker is our next running back. Kenneth Walker, I expect almost the exact opposite. I think we'll probably much better than Breece Hall early on. I'm just a little concerned that with Zach Charbonnet, he ends up seeing some of the receiving down work down the stretch. But Walker was my second most drafted running back last year. I mean, he won us a ton of money after the first month of the season. I mean, the only guys to outscore him from a points per game perspective were Eckler, CMC, Jacobs, Henry, Pollard, James Conner, Joe Mixon, Saquon Barkley, and Ramondre Stevenson. Now, Aaron Jones as our next running back is another one of these guys that I'm probably going to be avoiding, right? Given the fact that if you were looking at Aaron Jones in the historical comps on this RotoViz screener, running backs going into their age 28 season, coming off an age 27 year that Aaron Jones just saw, included Jamal Charles going from 2014 to 2015. Jamal Charles, way better than Aaron Jones ever was. And Jamal Charles actually got injured going into that next season. Jamal Anderson got injured as well. Steven Jackson went from 15 points per game down to 12.5. Larry Johnson, 16 points per game down to 11.5. Fred Jackson declined to 11.5. Chester Taylor went down to 10. Joique Bell went down to 8. Chris Johnson, another running back that was way better than Aaron Jones ever was, went down to 7.3. Darren McFadden went down to 4.5. So yeah, the historical trend is running backs at this age get worse. And on top of this, if you are looking at the quarterback situation, should be a worse offense overall this next season. Now, our next running back will be Jonathan Taylor. And with Taylor, I want to be putting a massive asterisk here. The reason I'm ranking him here is it's going to be for leagues where it is a shallow starting lineup, where we are chasing upside down the stretch, where you are able to draft Jonathan Taylor, put him on the IR for the first month of the season, and then be able to go through and bring him back week 5. Now, if it's a league where you can't put Jonathan Taylor on the IR, which you should be able to, right? He's on the PUP list. Then I think you have to push Jonathan Taylor lower than this. If it would be a Jameson Williams type situation, if it will be an Alvin Kamara type situation, where not only do you not have this player through the first month of the season, but at the same time, you're having to burn a roster spot on your bench, prohibiting you from making waiver wire moves, you're going to have to lower Jonathan Taylor lower than this. But I'm assuming that you can put him on your IR. And if you can put him on your IR, then there's not too much of an opportunity cost with it. Now, Miles Sanders will be here as well. Obviously, nothing close to the same ceiling as what you're going to have with JT. But with Miles Sanders, you have the guaranteed contract. He has the guaranteed role in Carolina. I mean, also, I expect an expanded role as a receiver based off the last time we saw Miles Sanders with this coaching staff. And with Bryce Young not being as much of a rusher as Jalen Hurts, he will naturally have a higher check down rate. Damien Pierce will be our last player in this tier. And yes, I'm going to be excited to go through and continue to draft Damien Pierce. We've been drafting him all offseason. We used to get him at the end of the 6th, the beginning of the 7th round in Underdog drafts. This is a running back that had a great rookie season with Davis Mills at quarterback. Now you get an upgrade going over to CJ Stroud. They only bring in Devin Singletary as a backup running back. You can see that based off the contract. You can see that based off the preseason usage. So I'm actually pretty pumped about Damien Pierce at his current price in fantasy football drafts. Now, our next guy will be Alexander Madison, and with Alexander Madison, at one point way back in May, he was my most drafted running back in Underdog because we were getting him round 9. Haven't drafted him a ton as of late just because you are having to take him over Damien Pierce in a lot of drafts, and it's hard for me to take him there, even if we've seen the elite level ceiling without Dalvin Cook before. Obviously, we've never seen Alexander Madison handle a full workload through the course of the entire year. Now, our next running back will be Dobbins, who has never finished higher than the running back 33 from a points per game perspective. But I think you have a couple different reasons to assume that this next year will have his best situation of his career. At the same time, he should be fully healthy coming off the completely destroyed knee from 2021. And with Dobbins, it's a running back that is back at practice, back with the team, clearly not getting a new contract, nothing to be concerned about. Akers with our next RB has never been a hyper-productive player in fantasy. Every single year at the very end of the season, he goes out there and he flashes some type of talent. Now, with Cam Akers, the thing is, there's nobody behind him on the depth chart. So overall, I mean, you know you have the role going into this next season, but it should be a horrendous offensive line in Los Angeles. A pretty bad offense overall as well. I mean, right now you actually have Las Vegas sportsbooks putting the Rams at 6.5 wins this next year. And if you look at the season-long pick'em on Underdog, they only have Cam Akers at 6.5 rushing touchdowns, 750 rushing yards. I mean, that's the exact same mark as what you have with the running back we're about to talk about in David Montgomery. But our next guy will be Javonte Williams. With Javonte, similar situation that you may have to Breece Hall. I really like the upside that you have later on in the season, and I think it's a very encouraging sign that this man actually played in the preseason. But Typically, it's not a great idea to be drafting running backs coming off torn ACLs. More importantly, Javonte Williams also had structural damage on top of that, where I think he most likely splits with Samaje Perine early on. You're more so making a bet that later in the season, he does continue to expand his role. I've drafted a lot of Javonte because we got him at such a premium discount earlier this offseason, but definitely a running back that's risen up a considerable amount. Now, our next running back will be David Montgomery, who's actually been falling in drafts with how good you have seen Jamir Gibbs look in the preseason. But with Montgomery stepping into a role that led the NFL in rushing touchdowns last season, I think he does still have a role in the red zone based off the overall contract. And with Montgomery, he's kind of a useful running back with a healthy Jamir Gibbs. But if Jamir Gibbs were to go down, then at that point, you could say that David Montgomery would have league-winning upside, just given the fact that he can catch the ball. I mean, we saw him back in 2021, or pretty much for 3 straight seasons now, have over an 11% team target share. We know he has touchdown upside given the offense. So I think he's like a low-end RB2, high-end RB3 in games where Jamir Gibbs plays. But I think he has running back 1 upside if Jamir Gibbs were to go down. Now, our next running back will be James Cook. James Cook, a little bit of a smaller build, right? I mean, what's concerning is the last preseason game. You're seeing some usage with Damien Harris in the red zone, and that's the main thing that you have to be worried about, because if James Cook doesn't have access to those red zone looks, plus you're competing with Josh Allen as well, as not going to have that high of a check down rate because Allen can go out there and run the ball himself. Even if it's an elite level offense, it still may not be the best situation from a running back perspective in fantasy. So it's a very interesting case of what happens with Damien Harris here in Buffalo. Now, James Conner will be our next RB, and Conner I've actually drafted in some underdog drafts because in those underdog drafts, you can get James Conner round 8, which is a very appealing price point. However, in your like ESPN drafts, I've seen people taking James Conner round 4, round 5. Please don't do that. The Arizona Cardinals are in full-blown tank mode. You see this with every single action they've made this offseason, plus the fact that Las Vegas sportsbooks right now have them like minus 130 to get fewer than 4.5 wins this next season. I mean, it's a pretty much guaranteed spot that this is one of the worst offenses in the NFL. And another very bad offense will be Rashad White. At least with White, you are getting the receiving down back, right? Where we also know Baker Mayfield, not really a scrambling quarterback. So Baker naturally, when the pocket collapses, is going to look to dump the ball off. And you could see a high check down rate for the running back in this backfield. Now, DeAndre Swift, I would say, is probably a better talent than White. Probably in a better offense as well, but it's concerning to see the reports about the Kenneth Gainwell usage this preseason. I mean, a lot of people are on the train where Kenneth Gainwell is the RB1 this next season in Philadelphia. If you go look at the Underdog season-long pick'em, they have DeAndre Swift only at 4.5 rushing touchdowns and 525.5 rushing yards. Now, Swift, obviously, a phenomenal receiving down back when it comes to his talent. Now, the issue is just typically Jalen Hurts isn't going to check the ball down when he can go out there and he can run to pick up the 3rd down on himself. Now, our next guy will be Alvin Kamara, another one of these check down RBs. With Kamara, very similar to what we were talking about with Jonathan Taylor. If you're playing in a league where you could put him on your IR, where, I mean, I don't know if you can put a suspended player on your IR in your format, then I'm going to be a little more inclined to go ahead and draft Alvin Kamara because the opportunity cost to have to keep him on the bench and limit your waiver wire moves early on in the season isn't going to be as high. But if you have to keep him on your bench and you just can't make waiver wire moves through the first month of the year, then honestly, I'm probably going to push Kamara lower than this. And Dalvin Cook is an intriguing pick if you are going to be in a very active league with a trade market early on in the season. Because I think what's going to end up happening here with Dalvin Cook in this New York Jets situation is I think Dalvin is going to have a very large role right away. I think that you are actually probably going to see a larger role for Dalvin Cook than Breece Hall. And you're going to have a lot of people that were Breece Hall haters earlier this offseason screaming, told y'all so, told y'all so, told y'all so. Dalvin Cook is the guy. Breece Hall is complete dust. And then I think as the season goes on, Breece Hall is going to expand his role as Dalvin Cook fades down the stretch. So if you're in a league where we're trying to optimize for the fantasy football playoffs, like weeks 15, 16, 17, such as like an underdog tournament, right, where it's like a $25 buy-in, I mean, $3 million first place prize for Best Ball Mania, their Dalvin Cook's not going to be too appealing for me. However, if you're like a redraft league where you think you can start Dalvin Cook through the first month and then sell him high, I think maybe you could push him a little higher than this. Now, our next guy will be Brian Robinson. He has jumped Gibson for us in these rankings. And that if you look at Brian Robinson, what was most appealing about his preseason performance is the fact that he looks like he may be expanding his role as a pass catcher a bit. Obviously, everybody assumed the second that J.D. McKissic left Washington that all the J.D. McKissic targets were going to go directly over to Antonio Gibson. But, I mean, Brian Robinson was getting involved as that pass catcher. And at the end of the day, this is a running back that, I mean, if he does anything as a receiver this next year, it's going to be better than last year, where he only had a 3% team target share last season. Now, Isaiah Pacheco will be our next running back. Pacheco also running back with no receiving down role last year. Didn't even average a target per game last season. Now, hopefully we're able to get that up this next year because he has been a quiet winner of the preseason. I mean, it's a running back that did get injured. We really haven't got to see too much action. But at the end of the day, they could have drafted an RB. They could have gone out there and signed one, where in reality, all they did was re-sign Jarrett McKinnon and take a shot on like a super, super cheap rookie. Now, Dillon will be our next RB, and I think with A.J. Dillon, it's a running back that's interesting in that if you are very desperate during a bye week, you can go ahead and start him, but that's not really why you're drafting A.J. Dillon, right? You're drafting A.J. Dillon because we've seen him in the weeks where Aaron Jones has missed, gone out there and not only been a great running back on first and second down, which everybody knew he would, but also been a running back that actually saw usage out of the backfield as a pass catcher. So that's what you would be excited about with A.J. Dillon for the ultimate up case scenario. Now, Antonio Gibson as our next guy, you're a little more excited in a full PPR league, right? I mean, he's the guy that you naturally assume is going to be the receiving down back in Washington. I mean, I just think that Brian Robinson sees more touches overall. And if Brian Robinson looks like he has any receiving down usage this next year, I mean, Antonio Gibson's just a lot less appealing. Now, Zach Charbonnet with our next spot will be a running back that's difficult to project out early on in the season, but he was a phenomenal talent at UCLA. His final season at UCLA, he went out there and had 168 total yards per game. He averaged 3.7 receptions per game as well. So, I mean, this is someone that's going out there, and he's a great pass catcher, and I think he actually takes that role as the season goes on from Kenneth Walker. But similar to Dillon, you're not really drafting him to go through and start him when Kenneth Walker's healthy. You're drafting him for the premium handcuff appeal if you were to have an injury to Kenneth Walker. Now, Jamal Williams as our next back, I think is an intriguing pick if you go through and take some of those running backs early on that may struggle at the beginning of the season, right? I mean, Jamal Williams is the perfect guy to pair up with Alvin Kamara, Breece Hall, Javonte Williams, Jonathan Taylor, any of those running backs that we don't know if we can start weeks 1, 2, and 3. But we know we'll be able to start Jamal Williams. That'll be the starting running back for the New Orleans Saints. And honestly, probably be a must-start guy. But at the end of the day, he will be in a 3-man running back by committee by the time Kamara is back. Now, Tank Bigsby as our next RB is a running back that is essentially a poor man's version of what you have regarding A.J. Dillon. In that if you really need to start Tank Bigsby, sure, you can do it. He'll see some of the carries between the 20s in Jacksonville. But you're more so only rostering him for the upside case if you were to see an injury to Travis Etienne. And it's the same spot with Elijah Mitchell. If you really needed to go through and start Elijah Mitchell with the healthy Christian McCaffrey, you can. But I don't necessarily think that's why we're drafting him. That's not why we're rostering him. We're rostering him for the hidden handcuff appeal if CMC were to go down. But I think that's all I have for y'all. Again, thank you so much for checking out this video. And of course, if you have not done so already, go down there, drop a like, subscribe to the channel if you play fantasy football. And if you want to check out any of those season-long pick'ems, or if you want to get into a draft with us tonight, tomorrow, the next night on the live stream, you can find that link to Underdog Fantasy in the description of this video in the comment section. And if you sign up to Underdog with promo code FLOCK, they're going to match your first deposit dollar for dollar up to $100. Plus, you'll get our 2023 fantasy football rankings, a free trial to flockfantasy.com where you can find our 2023 fantasy football draft guide. And on top of that, only with promo code FLOCK are you going to be able to take advantage of the exclusive Josh Allen pick'em week 1, more than less than half a passing yard against the New York Jets. So please make sure you're taking advantage of that. We're my butt off to get it for you. But thank you again, ladies and gentlemen. I really do appreciate you. And I really hope I get to see you out with the live stream later tonight.